Hey guys, this is part 2 of section 5.8, and this part's going to actually move pretty quickly, so don't fret, there's not too much time in this video. So we left off talking about how do we know which technique to use when solving a quadratic equation. There are 4 techniques we've learned: factoring, taking roots, the quadratic formula, or completing a square. So we talked about how to know when to use which one. And then we also talked about this special part of the quadratic equation, the part under the root symbol, the radicand, and it's called the determinant. And we can use the discriminant, it's called the discriminant, and we can use the discriminant to determine how many solutions we'll have and what type of solutions. Now we're going to work backwards. Occasionally we'll be given a solution, and we want to take that solution and work backwards to figure out what the quadratic equation was. So you're given the solution and you're working your way backwards. So let's try that out. Let's start with this solution. Let's say we're given the solution x equals 2/3. Now we know that quadratic equations have 2 solutions. Well, when we only find one solution, what that means is that that's actually the solution twice. So if we were to write that in factoring form, for example, we would have x minus 2/3 and x minus 2/3. And that would be our 2 different solutions. And then what we would do to work our way back to the quadratic equation is go ahead and FOIL that out. First, outside, inside, last. What you're going to end up with is a bunch of fractions, however. And so there's actually a step that we can take beforehand, before we multiply this out, that will eliminate some of those fractions for us. Now you can absolutely do it this way. If you want to deal with fractions and multiply fractions, go for it. Go ahead and FOIL that x minus 2/3 there. But if you don't want to deal with fractions, then here's what we can do. First thing we can do is multiply both sides by 3 to get rid of the fraction on the right hand side. And so that leads us to 3x equals 2. We then need to set that equal to 0. So we have 3x minus 2 equals 0. Then we're going to multiply that twice. Again, we've got 2 parts in our quadratic equation. We've got to get to that x squared term. So 3x minus 2 times 3x minus 2. Using FOIL, we get 9x squared minus 12x plus 4 equals 0. So as you can tell, no fractions here, nice and neat. What about when we are given something like this? X equals 5 plus or minus 2i square root of 7. Well, the first thing that we want to do is get rid of this I. And the way that we get rid of an I is by, you probably saw the hint here, squaring it. Remember that I squared equals -1. So we are going to square both sides here. First we're going to move the 5 to isolate the radical term, and then we will square both sides. So we moved the 5, and now we're going to square both sides. To square x minus 5, don't forget we can't just distribute squares. What this means, x minus 5 squared, means x minus 5 times itself twice, which looks like this. So in order to square that, we're actually going to have to FOIL. So x minus 5 squared is really just x minus 5 times x minus 5. And this is one term here, squared. So when we square that, 2 squared is 4. I squared is -1. So we have 4 times -1. And then the square root of 7 squared, square root and square just undo each other. So that leaves us with 7. So that's how we got to that -4 times 7 down here. All right. On the left-hand side, when we FOIL out, we get x squared minus 10x plus 25, and on the right-hand side, we get -28. Remember, we're trying to set this equal to 0, so we need to add 28 to both sides. When we do that, we get x squared minus 10x plus 53 equals 0. So, today, we identified the best method for solving quadratic equations. Hopefully, you wrote down those notes of when to use what. If you did not, you can go back and watch this video, or you can look at page 218 of your book, which actually has it organized in chart form. It tells you the method, it tells you when to use, and it gives you an example. And that is on page 218. There is a nice chart that you may want to copy into your notes if you did not write that down during our presentation today. So we identified the best method for solving quadratic equations, and we evaluated the discriminant to classify the nature and number of solutions to a quadratic equation. Remember, the discriminant is just the part under the radical sign in the quadratic formula. And so that was the b squared minus 4ac. We can use that before we even do the quadratic formula to make sure that we are getting the correct number and the correct type of answers. The last thing that we did, which is not listed there, is we took given solutions and we worked our way backward to come up with the original equation, the standard form quadratic equation. And so that is the last thing that we did today. If you guys have any questions, make sure that you write those down along with your examples and be ready to go next class.